Hello, BookTube. Who's up for a poem today? On a very hot and humid Monday, Monday in which rain and thunderstorms have been promised, and there's a thunderstorm warning for my part of Massachusetts until 8 tonight, that the thunderstorms could be severe. There aren't going to be any thunderstorms. There's going to be a single drop of rain. Those percentages have been steadily going down every time I look at them and getting later in the day. And my experience with the apps and the projections that show percentages when it comes to precipitation, since we're in the end times, is that if the prediction for precipitation is 100%, there's a 10% chance that it will happen. And every stopper down you go from 100% gets you that much closer to zero by huge increments. So if the forecast says there's a 70% chance of rain in a given period on a given day, that means zero. That means there is no chance. The forecast might as well be clear. It's simply not going to happen. The only way you're even going to have a chance is if the forecast says 100%. And even then, that doesn't mean it's sure. That means there's a 10% chance of it happening. But the frontal system, that is the clash of systems that is producing the threat of this rain, this non-existent threat of rain, is causing it to be mighty humid today, mighty humid. So out of the frying pan and into the sauna, because for most of the last 6 days, it was simply too hot, upper 90s Fahrenheit, to go for any long kind of walk with the bean. And today, it's maybe not as hot, but it's soakingly humid, which is, if anything, worse. You can't even catch your breath. The perfect time to take solace in a poem. And we're going to go once again to this anthology, which has already earned its paying price, especially since it was free. I found it in a little free library. Somebody put a 1960s dust jacket, a school dust jacket, over a 1930s book, The New Poetry. And I've just been having a blast going through this. Poem by poem. I have one picked out for today. It is by a poet named Olson, and it's called Waters. The waters of the world in their cold chasm move with slow silver muscles, glide beneath a tenuous green sheath, unfurl to massy folds, or march in mountains. Rivers and fountains and waterfalls in reveling ropes of smoke feed the green chasm. The waters of the world conceive cold, slow, insinuating fish that ghost and glow suspended in steep streams or glossy mountains. The marble thews of earth are washed with waters. The rivers of earth in twisted silver trees root within twinkling seas. Steely rain trembles in taut blue wires. The gray ocean, sliding with rugged hackles in slow wind, moves with an inextinguishable motion. Only we transient, we besieged by death, we doomed to the tall winds in their cold commotion, to the wind in the hemlocks breaking, the wind in the pines, cry truce now, with all lovely fury of motion. Wherefore, O waters, we, being with one breath troubled intolerably, being at length no more than various waters moving to one end, many and mutable, to one end only, of utter darkness and invading wind, it is as waters, then, as waters bound to the stern surrender of their trivial guise, we yield, who are intransigent and lonely, fearing no ultimate darkness, having found night comes like the slow closing of tired eyes. There are poems that I read to you on our daily little poetry visits that I have a whole bunch of things to say about. I have a whole bunch of things to say about this. This poem is part of a school. It's part of a movement. It's reflecting an attitude that was promulgated in popular books of the time, the 2 years before it was written. And none of that matters. In this case, none of it matters because of how staggeringly beautiful this poem is. It doesn't even matter that the rhyme scheme, once again, is not completely formal and is largely buried. Some of them you could probably have heard. The first sentence in the first stanza ends with mountains, and then the first two words of the next line ends with fountains. That's about as demonstrative as it gets. You can find the scheme if you run through the poem, but reading it discovers it to your reading ear without parsing out syllables or anything like that. There are, in other words, no formal end rhymes, no nothing like that, and it doesn't matter because of how staggeringly beautiful the verse is. The gray ocean, sliding with rugged hackles in slow wind, moves with an inextinguishable motion. Only we, transient, we besieged by death, we doomed to the tall winds in their cold commotion. To the wind and the hemlocks breaking, the wind and the pines, cry truce now with all lovely fury of motion. How amazing that is, just amazing. The contrast of the adjectives and the nouns that they amplify. The intentional, grand sweep of the verse. This poet could have picked any words. Instead, the words of the poem replicate the slow, inexorable surging of great sheaths of water. How amazing. Just amazingly beautiful. And then, of course, you get the realization, the point at the end of the poem. It's not only meant to describe the ocean. There are some beautiful poems that do that, but this isn't just meant to do that. This has a trick in the final stanza, which is to draw a comparison between the endless marchings, the endless, dark, pointless marchings of the ocean and human life. Quick, what was it? Transient, besieged by death, intransigent and lonely. It draws not only contrast but parallels between those two things. Human life that becomes an endless surge of nameless forces, of impersonal currents that end up fearing no ultimate darkness, having found night comes like the slow closing of tired eyes. Just magnificent. I was overwhelmingly happy to read that, and if I were to tell you anything about Elder Olson, the poet, all of it would be familiar from these poetry get-togethers that we have. Everything that I tell you about him would be familiar. Went to really good schools, was a poet for the whole of his professional life, was also a critic and a teacher, was honored, a shelf of honors for his poetry, was well known, widely anthologized. This new poetry in the 1930s would not at all have been the only anthology that Elder Olson would have appeared in. And yet, as far as I know, completely forgotten, never anthologized anymore, and never commemorated. Probably a box or two of primary source documents that no one's even bothered to consult. Who even knows what organization or library or college those papers are lodged with? I think he taught somewhere in the upper Midwest or in Chicago, maybe somewhere, in some unconsulted archive. There are boxes and boxes of letters and maybe diary entries and who knows. Unconsulted, unvisited, unremarked upon, and gone. Now, you know, taste can change, of course, movements change. This author himself was part of a poetry movement that is long since over. But the poem I just read you was beautiful. It's a shame that it would be forgotten. It's as simple as that. I think it's a shame that it and so many of the other poems that we're finding are so completely forgotten. If someone were making an American poetry anthology now, they would never include even half any of the writers that we come up with. But as long as we're appreciating them, that's what counts. So there you go. That is Waters by Elder Olson. And that's our poem for today. A day that maybe I ironically chose it. Maybe it was just my preoccupation. Massachusetts has not had any precipitation in several dozen decades. We have no precipitation anywhere in the forecast, not even a drop. And we desperately need it. Massachusetts is in a drought, same as the rest of the world. As rain slowly becomes less and less of a phenomenon that we talk about. Rain, especially snow, will slowly become less and less of a phenomenon. It will be, we are not far off. If we won't experience it, certainly your grandkids will experience a world in which rainstorms are named. Just like snowstorms are now, and just like hurricanes have always been since the 1930s. Rainstorms will be named because they will be that rare. It'll be a point to notice. It'll be a feature. Maybe that's what drove me to read a poem about water. I don't really know. But it was lovely. and I'm happy to share it with you. So that's your poem for today. Maybe we'll do a poem every day this week. Maybe we will. So I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you.